This presentation is to give feedback on the November 2015 IGCSE Business Studies examination. Welcome everyone. My name is Karen Borrington and I will be delivering this feedback on the IGCSE Business Studies examination for the November 2015 series. I've been setting papers for many years now and I am the Principal Examiner for Paper 2 for this particular examination. I've also been involved in training for IGCSE Business Studies, both face-to-face and online, and I have been a Head of Business Economics and Enterprise in a UK 11 to 18 school. And I've also written a number of support materials and textbooks and materials for business studies. The session aims. These are firstly to give feedback on the common themes that arose from the November 2015 series. I will go through the kind of errors that candidates made, which will help with the second objective, which will help teachers understand how the assessment objectives apply to the question papers, and where candidates didn't actually address the assessment objectives. This will help teachers to understand how their learners can improve their performance. The materials that you may want to use with this feedback session would include question papers for November 2015 series. That's papers 1-1, 1-2, 1-3, 2-1, 2-2 and 2-3, and also the mark schemes that accompany these papers. There are also some candidate answers from papers 1-1, 1-2, 2-1 and 2-2. There are only a limited number of answers I will be able to go through, so I've chosen answers that show the kind of responses that candidate made correctly or not correctly. They are just simply ones to illustrate the kind of points that I am making. In addition to that, you ought to read the exam report for November 2015. This report goes through each of the papers for thorough feedback on how candidates responded to questions. They are very useful and will go into more detail on how candidates responded to all of the questions that were tested on these papers. In addition to that, you may wish to access the grade thresholds which were applied to each of these papers for the series. The session outline. First of all, I will go through some of the basic points about the papers and the way they are structured by way of an introduction. I will then focus on paper 1, looking in some detail at the key messages and errors that were made on paper 1 from November 2015. I will look at the advice you can take from these and advice you can pass on to your learners to try to ensure that these kinds of errors are not repeated in the future. We will then look at some examples of candidate answers. These can be looked at and marked, as the first example will not have marks shown. Then the following slide will have the annotation shown on the answer. The points that are coming from the feedback messages can be illustrated, and hopefully you will be able to see the kind of points that I am making. You will see where candidates didn't always get marks, and therefore what they can do to try and make sure this is not repeated. I will then go on to look at paper 2. It will follow a similar format. I will look at the key feedback messages from the paper. I will look at what candidates did correctly and what they needed to do to gain all the marks. Also, I will look at some examples of candidate answers again to show where candidates didn't always gain the marks and mention what they could do to try and make sure it isn't repeated. I will then look at some tips. This will be a summary of the tips that come out of looking at these papers and some of the messages that come from errors candidates made. This will hopefully help you make sure that your learners do not make similar mistakes in future examinations. Many of the things that we see as errors on these papers, unfortunately, happen one session after another, and they are the kind of mistakes candidates keep making. Hopefully you will learn from this and your learners will not make similar mistakes. Finally, There will be a little bit of information about other available support after this feedback. Introduction and overview. For the 0450 IGCSE Business Studies, there are 3 variants. You may find that you are either variant 1, variant 2 or variant 3. This is just to do with where your particular centre is located in terms of different regions of the world. Each of the variants have the same format. There are 2 papers, paper 1 and paper 2. Each of the variants tests similar assessment objectives and the weightings for each of these papers is the same. So each of the variants test the same assessment objectives and are of similar difficulty, so they are comparable. The difference is that the case study and the businesses in each variant will not be the same and the questions are different. However, the level of difficulty of the paper should be the same across the variants. Each paper, paper 1 and paper 2, for each of the variants, carries 50% of the final mark. Each paper and each variant is graded separately in each examination series. This is to ensure that the grading procedure is fair. If you were to look in the syllabus, you will see that the grade descriptors outline what is expected for a grade A candidate, a grade C candidate, and what an F grade candidate should be able to do. And whilst we endeavour to make the variants of similar difficulties, sometimes one of the variants might prove slightly more difficult or more accessible than one of the others. So the grade boundaries will sometimes have slight differences between them. This is to make sure that the papers are graded fairly and the candidate gets the mark that they deserve for the quality of the work they produce. Assessment objectives. For IGCSE Business Studies, there are 4 assessment objectives: knowledge and understanding, application, analysis, and evaluation. Firstly, for knowledge and understanding, some of the questions will be testing a candidate's knowledge of particular facts, terms, concepts, theories, or techniques. And candidates are expected to be able to define particular terms or to use them correctly in longer questions. Typical questions that are asking about knowledge might be, what is meant by? And these kind of knowledge questions are found on paper 1. Secondly, application. Candidates seem to find application quite difficult. Application tests a candidate's ability to use their knowledge and understanding in the context of the particular business they have been given. Now, this means that candidates need to apply knowledge and understanding to the insert or case study that they have been provided with in paper 2. However, for paper 1, at the beginning of each question is a stem that outlines a particular business on which the questions are based. A candidate must answer in the context of the business they have been given. So, for example, if they were being asked to answer a question about manufacturing business, then the answer should not be in the context of a service industry. Whatever candidates say should be appropriate to a manufacturing business. So they need to read the questions carefully and be sure that they are applying their answers correctly. Thirdly, there is the assessment objective analysis. Analysis is where a candidate is asked to distinguish between evidence and opinions and interpret information. Typical sorts of questions might be where candidates are asked to develop their point and explain how it affects a particular business. For example, what are the advantages of particular methods of motivation? Candidates need to be able to say how these particular motivation methods might be effective for the business in the case or insert. So candidates need to explain their answer. Explain why a particular advantage is a benefit to that business. Another example could be why a particular decision might mean a business increases its profits. The answers should give an